Hello, everybody. How's everyone doing today? Welcome to the Reload. I hope that you are all enjoying your morning. Make sure if you have not done so already to check out the Reload. If you're listening to this on iTunes, if you're listening to this on Spotify, make sure to check out the Reload live every Tuesday at 12:30 p.m. Eastern Time on twitch.tv/prediction esports. That's two E's in the word prediction. You can also find us on iTunes, Spotify, and YouTube. Make sure to find all of our podcasts and shows there. We'll have links in the live chat if you're interested. Prediction offers the chance to learn and converse on more in-depth subjects about all the latest and greatest esports, from NBA 2K to Overwatch to Super Smash Bros. Ultimate to Call of Duty. We only continue to expand rapidly each and every day, and feel free to let us know what games you guys would like to see us get involved with next by mentioning us on social media. Tweet at us at Prediction or at myself at LandO. And like I said, if you're live with us right now on Twitch, you know that in fact we do have a guest today, our first guest in the Reload history, if we really want to be, exact. But like I said, we've got lead CWL observer, the best observer of all time, caster, analyst, Michigan lover, my good buddy Paradox. How are we doing today, Q?
Hey, I'm doing all right. How about you?
I'm doing good, buddy. Like I said, super excited to kind of have you on and to kind of hear your thoughts on a number of different things that we're going to be talking about today. But I got to ask you, before we even hop into the Call of Duty stuff, how was your heart rate this past Sunday versus the Eagles? I know Detroit narrowly pulled that win off. What was your thoughts on that?
So I have a good friend of mine who's an Eagles fan. So him and I are going back and forth, and then it seems like every week so far the Lions have found a way to try and lose the game, and somehow walk away with a win. That was just, after Michigan got thrashed on Saturday, seeing the Lions almost choke that again, that was not a good time for me.
I was going to say, I feel your pain in certain ways. I obviously your game was much closer. I'm a supporter of the Browns, for those who don't know. Not too many of us out there, but the narrow, I would say the narrow loss we had versus the Jets and stuff, it was just, I don't know. It was, or not the win we had versus the Jets, but the loss that we had recently. It was just, I don't know. I don't know where my headspace is at. I really don't know where or what to feel. I don't know if I should be happy. I don't know if I should be sad. Like I said, our loss versus the Rams for me was just, it's up in the air. I don't really know what to think. But I think the majority of the NFL right now, fans have no idea what to think. Like, should we be happy? Should we be sad? Like, where are the rankings at? I really don't know. But best of luck.
Times.
Yeah, exactly. Best of luck to Detroit. I've always been a fan of the Lions in some capacity, obviously. So, but let's go and talk about, from sports to esports, right? There's a lot of things that we have to talk on today. A lot of major changes that have occurred really in the last week or so. One of those being the fact that previously known Optic Hex, now regularly Hex, has in fact joined NRG, for those who don't know, NRG does own the Chicago spot for the upcoming Call of Duty League, and when it comes down to franchising. And like I said, this was a massive change, really, Q, for the entire Call of Duty community, just because of how much that the Optic brand has meant, since Hex has kind of been at the forefront of that forever, really, in terms of competitive. It really was kind of sad to see it all kind of happen the way that it did, whether, from a regular fan standpoint, it was sad to see the way that it went down in terms of Infinite Esports, just to kind of see the brand start to crumble the way that it did, and kind of how it's transitioned over the last few weeks, the last few months, even the year and a half kind of, time spree. Obviously, this is, a major change up, but whenever we were kind of watching this all break down, I want to hear your thoughts on this one. Hex, right, he leaves Optic. It's kind of announced that he joins NRG, obviously in Chicago. What were your thoughts on that move? And did you really kind of maybe see it coming, that Chicago could be the next stop for him?
I mean, I thought about it, right? Especially with the way things went down, people didn't know if he would sort of try to stay and build in LA with Immortals Gaming Club and what they're going to do in the franchise league.
Right.
But as soon as Chicago's announced, I think everyone there were rumors on Minnesota too, but as soon as that city sort of came out, people were like, okay, that might really be a thing. And I'm happy it is, right? We get to see this happen, but it's also going to take some getting used to, for sure. Just thinking of Hex not being part of Optic anymore, it's just I mean, you go back, tell me this a couple years ago, I think you're absolutely crazy. It's it's interesting to see how things have changed, but I know he's going to do an absolutely phenomenal job in NRG in Chicago.
Yeah, I think that's a very fair estimate to kind of bring up, and I totally agree. Like if you were to say, "Oh yeah, Hex versus Optic," I'd say, "Wait, did you get that sentence correctly? Like, are we on the same sheet of music? Is everything okay?" But it really is no surprise as well, right? That Chicago currently sits instantly, like within just hours, are instantly now the most followed Twitter account of all the franchises that have been announced as well. But the kind of conversation doesn't necessarily end there in terms of Hex and what's kind of going on now with the Optic brand, as it is owned by Immortals. For those who are maybe somewhat unaware. It was announced as well that Mud Dog, previously of 100 Thieves, he was head of esports there, is now the GM of the LA franchise. Obviously, yourself, myself, we kind of know Eric really well, but what's kind of your thoughts on his position now with Optic? I know he had that video that came out the other day saying like, "Hey, Green Wall," instantly flood of hate saying this is not the Green Wall anymore. This is not the same franchise. Just kind of give me your overall summary on Mud Dog and just kind of the announcement video that came out yesterday.
Yeah. Ludog's my guy. I think they did a good job with the video itself.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's going to get backlash given the current situation,
Sure.
but sort of addressing the past and saying, look, here's why I'm here. Here's what we're trying to do going forward. I think it's a really good job. You sort of pay an homage to the past, then pivot, talk about what's to come in the future and how you want to still respect that brand and move forward, and give those fans that are going to stay and follow that team something to look forward to, give them a face to look at. You have to give them something. And I think with that, they did a good job. Obviously, not everyone's going to think the same way.
Sure.
Obviously, people are not the most excited about everything that's happening. It sort of sucks for fans. It sucks for the people that have inherited that brand as well, because you have all these people who are really, really upset with it. But I mean, Mud Dog's a great guy. Like, we both know him. He's going to do a phenomenal job in LA, and I can't wait to see the team that ends up coming out there.
Yeah, absolutely agree. And I got to ask you too. This is something that I 100% am very solid when it comes down to my foundation, just in terms of the way the roster seems to be kind of rounding out, which we'll get into in a little bit. But do you believe that Immortals/LA Optic will be the most hated team in the league?
They could be.
I know, I'm with you on that one.
It'd be a stretch to say that.
Mm-hmm. I think too, like depending on the cast that they're able to get, so we'll kind of get into it a little bit. I want to speculate on something that we're going to be talking about here in just a short time, but still, just based on the roster that they've rumored to be lining up with, and just in general, it does seem as if that would not be too far out of the question, especially based off of the early announcement video. But I totally agree. Like your point on to Eric or Mud Dog. I mean, I think that was a big kind of power play for them. They are in a very delicate space right now where they really have to handle everything they say super carefully. I mean, literally at the announcements, "Hey, Greenwall," instantly that's all the videos about. That's all the comments, that's all the tweets, that's all the Reddit threads are about saying, "Can you believe that this guy just said the term Greenwall?" It's unfortunate, but I think that if there were to be someone who's prepared for the job, someone who knows to build a roster, it would be someone like Mud Dog, right? Back-to-back championships with 100 Thieves. I mean, just the composition of the way that those guys were brought together, Q, was fantastic, right? And whenever they ended up adding, Crowder and Priest to the team, it was like, okay, how is this going to work? A lot of people thought, could this be something? I thought it might be like a culture change for them, and it was exactly the case. And you got to give them all the props in the world for really kind of managing a very careful situation where they have a lot of guys who have a lot of egos, a lot of things to prove, if you will. Like we talked about Slasher, his ability at champs, underperforming on a team that was expected to win it all, and his arch rival Aches ends up closing it out. Kenny and Enable, second place at champs. Unfortunately for them, it would duplicate, but just in general at the time, right? Been a big chip on their shoulder. Octane coming in from, obviously Optic Gaming, had a lot of pressure on his shoulders as well. Worst placement in the franchise's history. So, I mean, it kind of rounded out to this moment where all of these guys who were on this team really had something to prove to each other, and it kind of was difficult to manage. And I think you got to give a lot of props to the front office, the guys at 100 Thieves and Mud Dog especially, for kind of putting those pieces together and knowing what would work. Because I think a lot of people would say, "Oh, that was all Crowder and Priesta," which, it was in terms of the in-game stuff. But I mean, a lot of people don't really think about the out-of-game things, the way that you have to manage those things carefully, who you bring in, the salaries behind it all of those kind of minor details. I think Eric was massively involved in, and because I think he'll be the guy that they'll be relying on a lot to kind of carry them through this very, very difficult period.
Yeah, I agree. Like, he's put himself in a position where it's going to be difficult, but 100%. He's up for the challenge, and with a brand and a name like Optic behind him, he gets to stay in LA, like where he's been with all the rest of the Oak Boys and everything.
Yeah.
It's a good fit, right? And I'm keeping an eye out, like absolutely with a microscope, because I really want to see how all this plays out in the long run.
Yeah, I do too. And I want to also bring up something that happened, maybe just a few days ago. Hex had a recent interview with ESPN Esports. Shout out to them. And basically one of the major quotes that he had from it, which is the only thing I'm really going to kind of take away and talk about, just because obviously we're limited on time. But he basically said whenever they face off against Optic, or in relation to now his ability to be on the other side, to look at Optic, and he says, yeah, we're competitors now. And that for me was just all it took. Like, you could give me a 45 an hour long interview, and that's the only thing, or rather that's the thing that I would take away from the most, is to think about how Hex versus Optic is now a thing, and it's going to be a thing for the future. And that's just one of the many storylines, and probably one of the biggest storylines we've had in a while for franchising, which I think is something that Call of Duty's kind of built off of, is really the players, the storylines, but obviously the presence that Hex has held throughout Call of Duty esports history, is crazy, and it's so massive at this point that it really does bring up, I think one of the craziest moments in Call of Duty history. But in your opinion, Q, where does this change? Which I know usually we associate changes with players, but in this instance, it kind of being a GM, or obviously I know Hex's situation, CEO, but just in terms of his position, where do you think that this change sits among the craziest roster moves of all time?
I mean, I think just because of the names involved, it's historic, right? Because people didn't think this day would come. If they did, they thought it was years and years away, right? So I think when we talk about a lot of changes happening within the history of Call of Duty, at least competitive Call of Duty, this is something that we'll always look at. I think these two things in line, we see as sort of the shift for the future, right? Hex leading Optic, us going into a franchise system are like right there with each other, and that sort of marks the start of this new chapter that we're about to venture into.
Yeah, agreed with you on that one. I think it definitely is one of the craziest moves, and just in general with this period of how valued Optic is as a franchise, and or rather organization now obviously entering into franchising. It is definitely one of the biggest changes of all time. I know it's kind of hard to associate, and usually you kind of take a backward point of view and look at this, but just in general, off the things that he's built, I think it's got to be up there in that conversation. I know it's more of on the manager side, the managerial side of things, rather than the player's point of view, but just in general, him splitting away from the Optic brand, I think has got without question to be up there. And I want to ask you too, just kind of in terms of forward thinking, how do you think that this change will impact the Chicago roster? Because I think someone already put in chat, and shout out to Brosen. He said, great moves by NRG as a whole lately. Not a huge fan of their new logo, though, which I kind of get that point of view. But just in general, I mean, how big of this was a move for NRG to make? And, do you think this is going to heavily change up their roster combinations that maybe they were kind of perceiving? They bring in Hex now. How do you think that kind of changes up their roster and their organization moving forward?
I think as soon as you bring in Hex, you get a lot of eyes on you, which is a good thing, but it can also be a bad thing. Like, there's that added pressure that comes in, but at the same time, you have people there who will ride with you through thick and thin, right? As we already sort of touched upon, the fan base for that team grew exponentially within like a couple minutes, right? So taking that, and I think making sure you're going to try to build something new there while still honoring the old and keeping those faces there is great, because you still get that attachment, you get those fans, you make sure you still have their loyalty, and then from there you focus on building a roster that's going to win you championships for years and years to come. It's a different name, but at the same time you still have that DNA there, and I think that's the key that's really going to help them going forward.
Yeah, agreed. Totally agree with that one. I'm excited. I'm excited to kind of see this new period, right? Obviously, it's going to be new for a lot of fans out there, just in general with franchising and all these massive change-ups, but I totally agree with your point. I think that Chicago has a massive boost to go off of. I think they have a lot of players that are now kind of sitting in their lap in comparison to what previously were. Obviously the name Optic is unbelievable, but it came down to a point where I think a lot of people are starting to realize that it wasn't the name Optic, it was the people who were associated with that name. And after this kind of change has started to go through, a lot of people thought, oh well, the Optic name, it's going to be carried over, there's going to be a lot of fans still associated with it. But I think as time has gone on throughout these announcements, people are starting to realize that Hex pretty much has transcended the brand that he created, right? The one that he lived by. So it's going to be a very interesting situation to see how it brews, and I think we all can kind of agree that is a massive, massive move for NRG to make. I'm sure an expensive one, but one that should be worth its weight in gold to a certain way. So like we said, NRG, great kind of situation for them. We think they're going to be having a lot more roster opportunities if they haven't already signed players up to this point. And I'll be honest, I'll take a fan favorite Chicago team. It's been a while since Chicago has been known for anything. Sports, esports, I'll take esports, especially Call of Duty. I think it'll be nice for the state to finally be good at something. It's been a while, but let's go ahead and transition right into something else. I know we could talk on the Hex and NRG thing for forever, just in terms of how important that it is. But let's go and talk about some announced players, right? We've had London, we've had Minnesota come out. They've announced 3 players individually for themselves, or in terms of both of their organizations. Let's go and touch on London first, as they were the team that did pretty much come out with the announcement in the initial phase. So for those who aren't aware, London has announced that they have got Wiskin, Scraps, and Dylan moving in to franchising. Before we even talk about the team, what was that announcement video, Q? I don't.
Yeah.
Goodness.
There's been a lot of talk in the community about that, the way that was handled.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of upward potential for them with announcements going forward.
There you go. It's a very nice way to put it. I think it's fair to say. You got all these guys, crazy movement, and it's just like Scraps just sitting on a couch. Like, yeah, sure. Like, this is
what's up?
What's up, guys? I think we're moving forward with this team. Sounds cool, right? Yeah, it's, for me, it was just like, you've got to be kidding me. Like, come on. Which I know they're getting a lot of flack, but regardless, though, let's go and talk about their team. Let's talk about this lineup a little bit more. What are your thoughts on just initial phase? You see Wiskin, Scraps, and Dylan. You're told they're on the same team. What are your kind of initial thoughts about these 3 in tandem together?
First, I think it's a play for the city. That's absolutely great. The region, you already have the fans, and you get some of those people. That's just phenomenal. I love to see the brothers back together as well. I love seeing them go against each other, but having them on the same team is going to be nuts.
Yep.
And I mean, we could go on about the year Dylan just had, right? Like, the guy looked like an absolute superstar, was carrying reciprocity at times. I'm sorry, but seriously, he was one of the players that you looked at, and at any point in a game, he could flip a switch, right? And just completely take over games. It was nuts. And I mean, if that's what we saw from him it's not technically his rookie year, but he's still really early on, what in the world is this guy going to do going forward, right? Yeah. And now you put Scraps and Wiskin around him. No disrespect to the guys on reciprocity. They had a great year.
Sure.
But get those 2 next to Dylan, and you saw 2 more you can put around? Man. That might be a roster we're looking at for top 4, just right off the bat. I know there's a lot of other rumored rosters out there, but from what we can see right now, that is a solid start to a team.
Yeah, I agree. I think that, you brought up some excellent points just in terms of their kind of even chemistry together. I mean, obviously we talk about, Wiskin and Dylan, their presence when it came down to reciprocity this year, obviously having a 4th place finish at champs as well, which, you're obviously going to earn a lot from that. Dylan's kind of, first major season in terms of being a pro. And my goodness, that guy was out of this world just in terms of straight up EU talent. I mean, you could evaluate him easily as a top 5 player in the entire game. And he didn't really even have the same time spread that a lot of other players did as well to kind of transition. We never saw him on a different team. So like I said, it was an interesting move, and it really was crazy to kind of see his progression and how fast it was. I mean, if you literally look at his COD Gamepedia page, which shout out to those guys. If you were to look at his page, you see it started in World War II, instantly rose from team to team. And it was he went from amateur to a top amateur team, instantly joined a pro roster. It was a very, very fast come up. And for me, it kind of reminds me a little bit of Formal, if you will, just in terms of how you enter a title. You start off with somewhat of an amateur-like team, or just guys who maybe aren't as familiar with the space or whatever it may be in terms of that situation. And then just, within months, transition from an amateur into one of the best players in the world. It doesn't happen very often, but usually when it does, it's a good sign that guy is someone that you want to hold on to. It's normally not just one title type thing. It's, hey, this guy has absurd talent. That's going to translate. Regardless of if he's as good, he will still be a phenomenal player moving into the future season. So I'm excited, and I want to hear your thoughts too on this one. Scraps and Dylan together, right? I mean, evaluated as arguably two of the best players in all of Europe, in combination together under the London brand. I don't really think the London fans could ask for anything better than that. But your thoughts on this powerhouse duo, right? Together in tandem together for the first time. Obviously, they have chemistry. They love being with each other. The vibes are clearly there, as the young kids would like to say. But Scraps and Dylan, you think they could be one of the best, if not the best, powerhouse duo?
It's one of the best for sure. Like I think of that combination of players, and I'm just like, oh, that's scary.
Yeah.
Right. Like I'm playing. I don't want to see those two on the map together. Like,
Yeah.
that's just something. But that also speaks to the level of skill I have in Call of Duty. But either way, that's a duo that I hope this London team can keep going forward, because those two together can do some absolutely ridiculous things. So whether if it's this year, next year, 2-3 years in the future, I think those are two people you really want to hold on to. We've talked a lot in the past about like Envy and Hook and keeping him around. I think you sort of have that same power here with both of them. You want to keep these two together unless there's like internal issues and something has to change. Like these guys are all on the same page and things are going well. You keep them no matter what.
Yeah, agreed. I think that's kind of that needs to be the play for the future for them. Is like, hey, these are the faces of your franchise. You keep them happy and you keep them together for as long as you possibly can. Obviously, you never know how things are going to work out in the future. But I think too for them, it's going to be valuable because it's not just okay, we're on a team together. It's hey, we are on the franchise that we want, right? I mean, we're supporting. And I know it's kind of been a difficult time for a lot of people to kind of get a hold of the idea that esports franchising, you're kind of based in a location. But if there was ever a group of guys who could kind of really rally around the spot that they're in, it would be this exact spot with these exact players. So like I think that they're going to be in a good spot. I think they're in a comfortable position for the future. We'll have to see how things kind of work out. But if these two guys can pretty much play the same way that they have, which it kind of depends. Obviously, strategies are going to be evaluated. They're going to be somewhat changed up. But I think that those two together, and along with Wiskin, who I think will succeed a lot better in a slower paced Call of Duty, should make for a lot of interesting plays. It should make for a lot of interesting kind of combos. But in your eyes, I know this is kind of forward thinking. It's all based off of rumors, but what are maybe some extra pieces you think the roster could utilize right now? Because I know we're kind of looking Scraps, Wiskin, more faster pace. We're looking at, in terms of SMGs to flex positions, obviously Wiskin with an AR for the most part, but what are some pieces that you think would mesh well? Not necessarily any specific players, but roles, things that you think that could really kind of complement the core three.
I think right now you're looking at some more help for Dylan first and foremost. You want to get that taken care of, and then you're looking at sort of a secondary AR or another flex to go along with Scraps, right? So I think if you're looking at the way this team can go, you have someone who's really fast paced like Dylan. The thing that I'm really worried about with this team though is that pacing, right? You have almost opposite ends of the spectrum when you think of someone like Dylan and someone like Wiskin.
Yeah.
Right. So how's that going to play on the map? Granted, they have played together. They understand that. But that was one thing at times we saw with Reciprocity. They weren't all playing what looked like on the same page at times. Granted, they got better and better as the year went along, but it was still sort of a recurring issue on some maps. So looking at that, that's what I'm thinking. So what sort of sub are you going to get? Is that going to help push the pace forward? How's that going to impact your back line? And then when you're thinking of the ARs, you want someone a bit more faster paced. But then what sort of position does that put Wiskin in? That's really going to be interesting.
Agreed. I think that's a good point. Like I said, I think, this is a great core to work off of, but I think that those can only be enhanced by a few of the, roaming players that could still be out there. I know there's a lot of, speculation and talk of who will be joining those guys. But let's get away from speculation quickly. We still have to talk about Minnesota as they officially announced, and I got to say, better announcement, that's for sure. But just in terms of the overall players, they did announce Silly, Assault, and GodRx, along with Saint as their coach. What are your initial thoughts on these guys, right? Silly and Assault, previous chemistry. I know if we really look way back, which I know maybe a lot of people weren't around back then, but what Silly and GodRx, a little bit of chemistry from the Isolation Empire days. That's a name I haven't heard in a while, Q, but there is some chemistry obviously on this roster. We talk about Silly and Assault, their championship back, in 2018 in World War II. They've kind of got that flowing. But what are your thoughts on this trio?
First and foremost, I'm really happy for GodRx. Just to see his upward progression over the years is really, really cool. Also, yes, isolation. Wait, that's a throwback right there. It's good to hear though. But seeing these three together is really good. I think Silly's one of the most underrated players in history,
Yeah.
just as far as what he's been able to do and what he's brought to teams over the years. And then you bring in Assault, solid MVP like AR at times. So these three together, I think once again you have a solid base. I really want to see the other two that complement these three.
Yeah.
So
Agreed.
that is something that I think it could go one of two ways. I think we could see a middle of the pack team, or we can see a team that is sort of more upwards of that middle, possibly pushing for your top fours. You think like your reciprocity, your late Enigma 6 sort of thing. That's where I think this team is at right now.
Mm-hmm.
So you add two pieces, you could be going upwards, you could be going backwards. Hopefully for them, I think they're going to go up.
Yeah, I think a lot of the Minnesota fans can really be excited about this team too, because I think you brought up some excellent points just in terms of the way this roster sits right now. I totally agree. I don't think the job by any means is done for this team. It's not like, hey, we're good. We just throw in a few extra guys and we're kind of ready to rock. No, by any means, I think that, from a lot of the rumored teams that are out there, I think they will need to kind of complement this team by maybe more, kind of solid, kind of consistent players, or maybe they need that star. They need that pillar of the team who can really kind of take over maps. Because like I said, I think these guys are excellent options. I think, like I said, they're going to fit well with the Minnesota franchise. And from what we know, right, when it comes down to, Minnesota, they have been very transparent with all the things that they've been working on. They seem to be a franchise that is already very much in depth with, their team. They seem to be very focused in terms of what their plans are for the roster. Obviously, they bring the guys out to Minnesota. They already are starting to get as much content as they can. I think this is going to be a really great home for anybody, but especially for these guys who have already been announced. Now, there was a little bit of backlash. I noticed on Reddit a few tweets as well. We're talking about Assault. Really, this guy was benched by Envy this year? But I think a lot of people don't realize the fact that he was a world champion the year before on a slower title, and for God's sake, he was the MVP of that game. And I think that he's going to fit a lot better in a slower paced game. I know you were kind of talking about it. I mean, there are certain players who just thrive on slower paced games, and obviously a majority of them happen to be main ARs, which is the role that Assault will most likely fill on this team. But like we said, we kind of compare paces of titles, which I know it's a little bit early to evaluate Modern Warfare, but I think it's fair to say, based off the beta, based off of a few things that we know, it should be slower than Black Ops 4, and I don't think that's going to hurt Assault in any way, right? His form was about the slow-paced style, kind of getting toward head glitches, trying to evaluate kind of that slower mentality, more methodical, if you will. I think that they may have found a diamond in the rough that a lot of rosters really weren't maybe thinking about as much as they should have, just in terms of what this guy can do in slower paced games.
I think so too. Like when you look at players, you're looking at what they've been able to do in the past, but you also think, okay, going into this year, how can they fit into this game and what can they do in this title? Assault's right in that line. I think this was an off season where you're really looking at your ARs and you want to get someone really good. And as you said, I think Assault can be that one where some people look at it and think like, well, what in the world are you getting this guy? You can pick this, that, and the other. But with the team that you have, with the people that you can field, I think that is a very, very good piece to have.
Yeah, agreed. I'm excited to see Assault play, and I think too the very fast progression that we saw from him. It's usually whenever you see a player start to kind of fall out of the scene a little bit, it's a steady progression. It's like, okay, he went from top placements, then he went to top 6. The KD start to lower over time. This was just 1 year to the next, and I think it really was kind of a pace thing, for him. I don't think that he instantly turned in from, a very great player to, someone who you kind of consider to maybe be in a starting lineup for a few different teams. So I think that this will be a much better title for him. And obviously to kind of, round things out, I think you covered Silly very well. Got our X, fantastic way to close out Black Ops 4. Obviously, under E6 led them to a top placement when it came down to champs. For me, I'm good friends with Adam, but I think he really was starting to kind of show his skill set when it came down to the end of the year. I'm excited to see if he can replicate that same style on Modern Warfare, because if so, I think that he can be the first, second option for this roster moving forward in terms of just the presence that he provides to a team and the way that he was playing. So I'm excited, though. I'm excited to kind of see what pieces they bring around. I think we both agree it's a great start. but I think the finish is almost more important than the current,
Yeah.
kind of set that they have. I think they've got really consistent players who will all work together, but it's about those ending pieces that you're really going to have to try to sell this one. It's not, like I said, their takeoff has been great. The landing, though, has to be executed well in order for them to be, a real contender. But last two questions I have for you, because I know we're already over time. I'm going to try to hop into the last few subjects as quick as we can. But ending thought, better trio, Minnesota or London? In chat, I'm going to give Paradox a second because I asked him a difficult question that I did not prepare him for, and I'll answer it myself. But chat, let us know, what are your kind of opinions on the better announced trio? Is it Minnesota, right? We talked about these three, obviously being, Goddard X, Silly, and Assault, or are we thinking more on the London side of Wiskin, Scraps, and Dylan? Now, this is just off of these three. It's not about the lineup that they could get for the future, but just off of if these three were to face off against each other, who are you taking at this moment, Q?
Right now, I think I've only been to the city once, but I'm going with London.
Okay.
Right? Like, just with what we've seen all three of these players do with the past, how they've been able to reach insane heights with Dylan and Scraps, and even Wuskin has had times where he looks absolutely insane. Yes, on the other side, you have a formidable roster, but I think the raw talent on London right now with those three guys and the pace they can even push a game to is nuts.
Yeah, agreed. I think that they've got a very scary core to them, I think, and just in terms of just strictly slaying. You look at the presence that Scraps and Dylan especially put up this year, and it's hard to contend. I think that Minnesota, for me, is a very, very good team. But like we said, I think it's kind of about like London has kind of got their core guys. Like they've got pretty much their faces of their team. And for Minnesota, we're thinking, okay, it could be Goddard X. Is it going to be like we still kind of have a few questions about them, but I'm kind of with you on that. I think for me at this very moment, London does seem to be a little bit better, but obviously that can change, right? In terms of future announcements, who else is kind of brought in, that could quickly start to change up a little bit. But I think we're all kind of in agreement with that. I think I see a few people in the chat even talk about stuff. Shout out to Esports Doug. He said, "Boo!" I know he's supporting Doug. The North a little bit in that instance. But we see Benji saying London. I see Cannon saying London. What Tyler 987 is saying, London based off of pure skill / slang. And really quickly, shout out to Represent GG for subscribing with Twitch Prime. We greatly appreciate it. Definitely not super familiar with subs on this channel, but hey, we'll take it every day of the week. We greatly appreciate that one. But let's go move into one of our final subjects and really one of our final questions in terms of straight up rosters for right now. Guys, I want to kind of get your opinions on this a little bit in the chat, so feel free to let us know. We're going to try our best to read off a few of these teams, but out of the 8 rumored full rosters that we have got right now, quick summary on each one of them. So let's start off with Atlanta. Simp, Abizi, Priesta, Major Maniac, and Celium. I think, at least for me, this is a very solid core, a team that has the ability to flex and really kind of evaluate themselves on different games, or rather on different kind of, game styles, if you will. But I am curious to see this roster's ability when it comes to kind of the future titles, maybe even the future of the way of kind of trying to take over championships or however it may be. A lot of people have talked about, hey, lack of an in-game leader. Do you think that matters a lot for Atlanta based on the roster they are rumored to have?
I think right now, the thing I'm scared about that team is when things get rough during a game.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Yeah. So you have a roster full of young people. I know it's been a sticking point with a lot of people. Crowder's in as the coach.
Yeah.
Congratulations, by the way. I think that is absolutely great. And it solves a lot of problems I originally had. I think this team going forward, it's a long-term play. Like, you might not do that well this year as well as you want to, but going into the future, I think this is going to be a team to really, really look out for, because these are all guys who are just starting.
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely.
Like, they have so much more to play, and you already have someone like Simp, Abizi. Like, these guys know how to win championships already.
Yeah.
Like, a core of this team knows how to win championships, and they're already this young. That is incredible experience. So I really want to see who ends up being the in-game leader here and how those comms are going, especially when things get rough. If they ever do, but mostly there's normally sometimes in a series where you need to bounce back. Even the best in the world have had series and times where you have to reevaluate the situation and say, okay, how are we going to win this?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I think, when that announcement came through, it was just like, okay, that's what I wanted. I think that kind of was like the check that I had was like, okay, where's the leadership really going to come from? I think by adding Crowder, that instantly kind of provides a majority of what they really kind of do need. Let's go move on, though, to Chicago, right? A very scary roster, a rumor to be, right? Scump, Formal, T2P back together. Gunless and Arcides, another longtime duo, back from the E United days in Infinite Warfare, and Envoy. I got to say, man, on paper at the least, which we talk about, how personalities in game are going to work, how those things can kind of translate for me is definitely the main worry. But I think this roster on paper is just absurd when you look at straight up talent, each position. I mean, you're looking at kind of player versus player. It's going to be hard to put a roster up against these guys where you say, wow, they look, kind of on paper outslayed. I don't think you're going to get this too often with Chicago.
Yeah, Chicago is absolute. This rumored roster is nuts,
Yeah.
right? Like we're talking about sort of teams that we expect to possibly be in like the middle of the pack. This is a rumored roster where I'm thinking, oh, they're top 3 for sure, right? The only thing I think that could get in the way of this team are internal issues or things going on the map, issues with roles, stuff like that. Like little things that you can address, but in game, looking at the skill of those players, this is a team to fear. Absolutely.
Agreed. Let's go move on to Dallas. Like we said, the rumored roster for this one, which I think it's all somewhat confirmed. Hook is going to be on this team just based off contracts, based off of the lack of movement. It seems as if Hook will be a piece, but around him, he's got some young guys and some vets, according to rumors, like we said, Clayster, Crimsix, Hook, Illy, and Shotzi. Now, this one is interesting, right? Because you kind of got that mix. You've got the winningest player of all time in Crimsix. You've got a 2-time world champion in Clayster as well. I mean, you've got a very, very well-rounded group along with Hook, who I think can kind of be the glue for this. But more specifically, Illy and Shotzi together. I'm excited for these two to finally kind of get their opportunity. I was hoping that they would maybe move together. And if these rumors are true, that's going to be a very scary kind of front line when we're talking about just the ability of how movement works, et cetera, et cetera. Hook, Illy, and Shotzi together. Man, really quick, your thoughts on that one, Q?
That's a scary 3 between Hook, Illy, and Shotzi for sure. I'm interested to see how Clayster and Krim sort of work together as well. Like, this is a roster I think that they could have some issues, right? Like, especially in game, at least possibly butting heads. But I think it's a roster where you look at talent-wise, it is a formidable roster for sure. And a lot of eyes are going to be on Illy and Shotzi.
Sure.
Like, there have already been eyes on them coming up, but this would be the time for them to really show what they can do. And I really want to see if they step up to the plate.
Yeah, I agree. I think they have a lot of expectations, for them right now. Like I am interested to see how Clayster and Krim would mix with one another. That for me could be something, but I think they kind of realize the young talent that they have in front of them. Right, we talked about Clayster, his ability on E United to work with Abizi and Simp, young talent. Even before that, we talked about the twins, but with Crimsix obviously working with TJ, more specifically Dashy this season, they have a history in working with young guys and obviously seeing some success. In terms of Clayster, absolutely, but who knows, right? There's a lot of kind of pressure on Illy and Shotzi to kind of live up, especially Illy, right? I mean, ever since he was like 14, he's been a guy where everyone's like, when this guy turns 18, the same story with Simp. So we'll have to see how that kind of rounds out. Next team to talk about, Florida, right? A rumored lineup of Mox, Skies, Frosty, Prestini, and Havoc. I actually like this team a lot, to be honest with you, because I am interested to see how a few of these positions work. I have been a Mox fan for the longest time, just in general, with his ability to kind of lead younger rosters. I think for me is definitely interesting, right? We talk about Mox and Havoc, their history together. Frosty looked fantastic, especially kind of toward the end of the year. I know one of the main complaints was just his ability of not having Call of Duty knowledge. I think that's understandable, kind of coming into a title. They've got Prestini, who looked phenomenal kind of toward the end of the year as well, who I think will be better versed in a slower-paced game. Then you've got Skies, who also at the end of the title, at the end of Black Ops 4, when he was put on this Luminosity team, and obviously prior to that, Elevate, was just lights out in terms of that AR. What are your thoughts on Florida and the roster that they've kind of presented? That is rumored, obviously.
Yeah, I'm really interested to see what the community's thinking, because I've seen people who are like, "Oh, this is good," and I've seen people who's like, "What in the world is this?" I'm siding with you. Like, I think this is a sneakily good roster. I think that's a word. Whatever.
we'll roll with it,
no matter what. Yeah, we'll roll with it. But this team, when you look at the pieces, it's really interesting. You have Frosty, as you said, really closed out last year strong, and I think we have not seen the best from him yet.
Mhm.
Brasini was looking good. Havoc looked really nice, especially in the latter half of the year. And then you have Mox and Skies. Like, that is scary.
Yeah, agreed.
You think of these two guys setting up behind cover, and these are the ones that are taking you out? Oh, man, that is. Ooh, try to get your sub pressure on that. These guys are just going to be chopping them down left and right.
Yeah, they are. I'm worried for a lot of other teams when it comes into search and destroy versus these guys, especially. We
Yeah.
talk about kind of that Genji combo. We talk about Sky's history in terms of search and destroy, and as well as obviously kind of being rounded out. I think there is going to be a decent amount of a decent amount of pressure on Frosty to really kind of perform and be that guy for them. But I think if he can kind of tap into that for me will really kind of decide where Florida sits in the standings. Like I said, if this team is announced. But speaking of rumored teams, we're going to move on quickly to the last few. This one, LA Immortals, right? We talk about the kind of the bad boys of the league, and I think it is interesting, right? This rumored team is set to be TJ, Hallie, Dashy, Slasher, Kenny, and JCap. Q, man, this is an interesting one that we talked about, right? Slasher and Kenny, obviously coming from 100 Thieves. I'm a big JCap fan, obviously, for those who know a little bit of my content that I've done about and talked about. Then we've got TJ and Dashy, right? Two guys coming in and staying on Optic, right? The young duo. Dashy looked unbelievable this last season. In combination with these guys, oh boy, there's a lot to kind of dive into, but just a few quick thoughts on this roster for you.
That's the other one where I'm thinking immediately, oh, they're top three, right? Like,
Yeah.
this team can go out and just put some others away,
Yeah.
right? Like, this is a lot of talent on one roster. The only thing I can say, I just want to see them play on a map together.
Yeah.
Like, I just want to see how they play with each other and how that sort of team possibly forms. But that's one that has me excited for sure.
Yeah, agreed. I think it's going to be a lot of fun to see Slasher and JCamp together again. Obviously, we talked about a lot of success in history when it comes down to those two. Obviously, a world championship in their midst as well. We're going to move on though. New York, right, headed out. It seems to be the rumored lineup is Accuracy, Temp, Attach, Zuma, and Zero. So, some kind of familiar faces, some kind of new guys coming into the team. I think that this roster can work pretty well. I'm very, I should say, interested. This for me is a team where I'm like, oh, okay, this is a interesting group kind of players. Obviously, a lot of history in terms of Attach and Zuma and Zero together. Obviously, Temp being brought in along with Accuracy. What are your interpretations of this New York roster?
That's another team where I'm sort of with you. Like, I like it, but there's also something there that bothers me just a little, and I don't know what it really is. Like, looking at Zero and Accuracy, I want to see the pace Zero plays at in this game. Accuracy is going to be your slower traditional AR. I really want to see where Zero goes. Sort of that second position that we were talking about with London, right? Like, what does that second AR bring to the table? I think you have Attack and Zuma. You've already touched on those two are really good front line together. And then Temp can be a solid flex no matter what. So even if Temp ends up taking that second AR, which I think would be kind of weird for Zero, but Zero's shown that he can do whatever he needs to do on the map, right?
Yeah.
But we've always talked about him being in AR and the talent he can bring to a team in that role. So seeing what these teams are going to be, and of course, this is all like speculation. We don't know how Modern Warfare is really going to play on a competitive level, but this is a team where I feel like they might be a little slow out the gate, but mid-season, I think they might be a dark horse team to look out for sure.
Yeah, I agree. I'm kind of interested to see the pacing of this team as well. And I think based off of if they are looking more at the AR side of things, like depending on what the meta is going to be, I think this team in terms of AR positioning should look great. I know a lot of people have said, oh, it's going to be an AR game, it's going to be an SMG game. It's the beta. Like, everything is going to change. No matter how well you think your M4 or your MP5 or your MP7 shoots, it's all still up for grabs, and who knows what's really going to occur. Let's go and move on to Seattle. Octane, Enable, Slat, Karma, and Apathy. This is an interesting group. There's been a lot of rumors thrown around in terms of what Seattle's team is going to be, but if it were to be this roster queue, where do you kind of see them at, and where do you kind of see a lot of the roles at for this team?
I like this team, and the roles is the key thing here, because I really don't know how those are going to work out with this team.
Yeah.
That's the big question for me, especially when you look at recent roles for these players.
Sure.
Like, obviously, we can go way back in history and see, okay, this player has been shown to be talented using this, that, and the other, but from what we've seen the past 2-3 seasons or so, the roles seem to be a bit odd with this team, but I think
Mhm.
this is a team that has veteranship, right? Like these guys know what to do in pressure situations, but I think they're going to be another dark horse team, maybe your fifth, sixth, sort of fighting to hit the upper echelon of teams
Sure.
and probably getting there at least once, right?
Yeah. So I like this team too. I think this is an interesting group of guys together. I think, like I said, kind of roles for me is definitely kind of somewhat up there. Obviously, we could speculate and say, oh, well, Karma's going to be the AR, Octane, obviously, main AR, type positioning. But for me, the SMGs are really going to kind of define a lot. And I think based off of Slacked and Apathy's play, it really could define a decent amount. Like I said, we'll have to kind of see, like I said, Enable, Slacked, Apathy kind of up there in terms of what the roles really are going to be for this team and how they're going to kind of transition into different play styles. But I kind of like the group that they're rocking with right now. I don't really see too many in-game problems with this roster, and I'm kind of very curious to see how they work in tandem versus some of the the Chicago's and the what rumored LA teams and stuff like that. But one last roster that is somewhat rumored right now is London. Obviously, we know Wiskin, Scraps, and Dylan. That is 100%, so we can kind of roll on with that. But the rumored other teammates seem to be Jerd and Rated. How do you feel about those two possibly entering the fray with those guys?
I really like the Jerd pick. I think that fits in really well with this team. Rated, I like Rated, right? Let me preface this by saying I like Rated. I don't know if Rated fits in with that team, though. That's the sort of worried part I am. And that goes back to the whole roles conversation we've had and the pacing, right?
Sure.
That's the only thing that's a question mark for me. I'm pretty sure they can make it work. Like these guys know what they're doing on the map. They have years behind them at this point. But I think that also might be a little bit of a sticking issue for them. And then, of course, you're going to have substitutes and everything that you can try out as well. So maybe that'll end up being a key for this team going forward. But I don't know. I like Jerd. Rated as a question mark just because of the pace of the game, though.
Sure, I get that. And I think, too, like a lot of people kind of forget, and just in terms of just strictly stats, I mean, Rated was insane at World War II. I mean, absolutely out of this world, defined as probably a top 5 AR in that game. So like if it were to work out in terms of the pacing, in terms of the chemistry were to work out, I think that's a great pickup for them. Like we said, we'll have to kind of see, but I agree. I think Jerd and Dylan, Wiskin, Scraps together, that would be that's going to be difficult. That's going to be a very difficult team to face off against just in terms of pace. And if this is a faster game than people are anticipating it will be, that for me is a roster that is going to be so hard to really handle in those positions. But that's kind of our quick thoughts on the 8 rumored full teams, guys, and I really appreciate everyone kind of for giving their input. I saw a lot of people talking about Kenny, his positioning, how that could really kind of change up the LA Immortals roster, if that is in fact going to be happening. A lot of people were kind of freaking out about the LA Immortals team, obviously just in general. I think they and Chicago seem to kind of be the front runners in terms of just like, oh gosh, that team is scary, along with Atlanta and a few others that we can kind of throw out there. But I'm excited. I'm excited to kind of see a few more announcements start to roll out. But really quickly, because I know we're over time, I wanted to cover very briefly the MW beta because this was obviously something that's been going on for the last few weeks. And I'm going to ask you, Q, maybe 3 to 4 questions. And I want you to try to answer these as fast as you possibly can. So we're talking like 10 seconds just because we have to kind of round things down here. We do have a time limit, unfortunately. But I want to even hear the chat's opinions on these as well. So first off, MW beta, have a few questions. So crossplay, yes or no? Do you like it?
Yeah, I loved it. Like getting the community together, fun.
Perfect.
Pure fun.
Like the answer. Best weapon, AR and SMG, both in the beta.
Ooh. I was a big fan of the M4 in the beta, but the FAMAS was also nasty.
Yeah.
I didn't really get to use the Odin that much, and I know some people were saying that it was really good. But the M4 was always like my go-to. I really loved using it.
Love it.
For subs, I spent most of my time using ARs in the beta, so subs a toss-up. I like the MP7 a couple times. I like pick it up off of the ground. I know people were saying the MP5 was good as well.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I saw like a few pros picking up the MP5, and I'm like, why am I not doing this? Like, why are you guys having so much success with it? I feel like I had a really good kind of combo in terms of attachments with the M4 that really made it just an absolute laser, but I agree with a majority of your picks. I'm a big fan of the MP7 as well. That thing from range, just for me, felt like an AR, but worked like an SMG up close, so I'm excited. Thoughts on the maps? I know there's a lot of talk in terms of, oh my gosh, I can't believe it. What were just your interpretations of the maps? Obviously, there were a few different combinations, games, but what was your, kind of beginning thoughts on how the maps played out?
I think my favorite map was like Gunrunner. I'm pretty sure that was. That was a lot of fun, but I think I played almost all at the multiplayer reveal, but some of them I'm really interested to see how they play out. I don't know if this is confirmed, and someone in the chat, please tell me if you noticed this. I don't know if it was just me, but Azir Cave halfway through the beta seemed to have gotten brighter inside of the cave. And I don't know why. It just seemed like the lights were turned on. It was really odd, but it was fun. Like I liked some of the maps, the way they played. I'm really interested to see the way the map starts to flow as the game moves on. That's sort of a thing I'm kind of worried a little bit about, but I think we'll be okay.
You think they pulled a Black Ops 3 Hunted, where just randomly everyone entered in the map, like, whoa, this is bright. Like, what just happened?
And it happened like mid-map for me. It was like at one point I was in a cave, it felt like it was pitch black. I respawn, go back in. I'm like, wait, I can see everything in here now.
Just
like,
press the button. They're like, there you go. Now you can kind of see. You had night vision goggles on. There you have it. Oh man, I'm excited though. I was surprised by a few of the maps, and I agree. I think for me, Gunrunner was probably my favorite map. Were you surprised by Ground War in your first playthrough?
That was interesting. I didn't play it a lot, but that was. Oh man, there was a lot going on in Ground War.
Yeah,
it was fun though. Being able to see targets that far away and trying to get shots on them, that was fun. Yeah. But I don't know if I'll be spending as much time at Ground War as other people. It's that sort of large scale battle's never really been my thing personally.
Gotcha. Cyber attack. Could it work for competitive?
Could it work for competitive? With a couple tweaks, I think possibly. It was a fun mode to play. I spent a lot of time playing it in the beta actually, because it was just a fun mode for me.
Sure.
But I don't know. There were a couple things like you get in the UAV when you have the bomb out and you're running with it. And I understand it's like a tactical thing. You can't shoot, but you are getting information. I don't know. I just feel like the community is heavily favored towards traditional search and destroy.
Sure. And last question, my favorite one. Claymores, should they be removed from human existence?
We had Shroud using Claymores. That's all I'm going to say.
That's a good way to round it out.
Oh, man.
I tell you what, Claymores, I used to love them in prior games. I'm a big Black Ops 1 head, and I use Claymores plenty. But boy, were those things annoying in the beta. I have no idea what it was. Just instantly, I see one, no matter where. I could even be like 50 feet away, and I feel like I died instantly. I have no idea. The explosion radius on them, oh boy. I hope that in some ways it's tweaked, or I'm going to be throwing a few controllers. And I very much value my controllers. They're expensive these days, and I do hold on to them very well. But that's going to kind of do it for the show today. I know we kind of went on for a little bit longer as intended, but I think that there's nothing wrong with that. I think we covered some really interesting subjects, and it's hard to kind of talk about Hex's move to NRG or some of these rumored rosters, the 8, rumored overall lineups right now, and the official ones in under, 25 minutes. So it's kind of difficult, but I think we did a really good job. Like I said, I want to give a huge thank you to everyone who tuned in terms of the chat today. You guys were fantastic. We appreciate, every time you type in the chat, every time that you're active, it really does mean a lot because we want to try to continue the conversation and hear your guys' thoughts on this one as well. If you are on iTunes, right, we are live every single Tuesday, 12:30 p.m. Eastern time on twitch.tv/Prediction Esports. Make sure to hop in the chat sometime. You can feel free to follow us on Twitter at Prediction you can also follow myself on Twitter at LandO to kind of receive some updates in terms of when those shows are going live, what subjects we'll be kind of covering maybe a little bit early if you want to try to hop in and talk in the chat. I usually enter in the chat about 30 minutes early and like to talk to you guys a little bit as well. But that's going to kind of do it right in terms of our subjects for today. Q, thank you so much for joining us, and it's a pleasure to have you. First guest in Reload history. Well, I'm hoping to have you back again. But where can people find you at?
So thanks for having me. First of all, this is great. Thanks for the chat, for all the great feedback, Doug, Kingdom Soldier, and everybody. Thanks. Really appreciate it. And you can find me on Twitter at ParadoxQJ, and hopefully behind the scenes on a franchise broadcast sometime soon.
There you go. Love it. Absolutely love it. Paradox, by far the best observer that Call of Duty has ever seen. I know in terms of just strictly based off of my driving history, how difficult it can be to drive and cast at the same time. I forget who was it who tweeted that the other day. It was like, if you've ever had to drive and cast at the same time. Blaze. Yes. Shout out Blaze. Absolutely the truth. Driving and casting, worst thing ever. I remember we had to do that back in AW at the old UMG events, and it was just like, do you want to do it? Because I don't want to do it. Like, do you want to? Like, you don't. Like, I would almost like ask someone. I will give you $20 if you drive for this series, so I can actually focus on what's going on. So, Q, excellent observer, and definitely should have a hand in that. But like I said, thank you so much, buddy, for joining us. Thank you everybody for joining us in the chat for today. But that's going to do it. The Reload, episode 12 already rounded out. It was a great show, and we hope to see you all next week.